Pain is never constant at a level. It always fluctuates, always. I could give you 1,000 techniques. I don't know how many you know, but I have come across hundreds of these things, right? There's a lot out there. You've seen a lot out there, I presume, right? And rather than list all the techniques, what I'd rather do is teach you the principles and then illustrate those principles by showing you how many different techniques are built up. Okay, in that case, I guess you're done. Give a round of applause. Thank you so much for that. Thank you very much. Come on back up, Joe. So I was kind of saving that for a little bit later on, but the reason for doing that is because two reasons. One, if you recall, I actually asked her unconscious mind to pause a process, a healing process, for demonstration purposes. That puts me on an obligation to fulfill my side of the bargain, doesn't it? Right? Which is part of what we did here. And the second reason for that is because the end process is just important. If I hadn't done that, my strong suspicion is that over lunchtime, all the pain would have disappeared and we just become just a normal sensation, should have been fine. But then would we have had that opportunity to put in the mechanism that she's just tested several times to pay attention to her body without having to have pain? Would she have had that opportunity? So that's a safety valve in here. There's a safety valve so that she can pay attention, she can seek medical attention if it's appropriate without having to go down the path of being ignoring it and getting to more and more pain and so on. Does it kind of make sense where we're going with this? We'll look more at techniques and stuff later on, but when you work with the unconscious mind, it's very important that you fulfill your promises. And I made a promise, and that's why I had to make sure I took the time to fulfill it. Whether or not you're leaving early is irrelevant. Does that make sense? Because once again, when the client is sitting here, your commitment is to them. So you have to follow up. If they choose halfway through, I'm down, that's enough, I don't need any more. If she said, I'm fine, or honestly, I don't need to come up again, then that's fine. I've offered to fulfill a promise, so the sincerity is still there, and it's okay. They made a choice, and they always can make a choice. Do you see where I'm going with this? Was this helpful to you guys? So now what I'd like to do is spend a few moments looking at what it is that we're actually doing. Really, you can see how this is really 90% of the work being done. Do you want to stand up and we'll get a mic over to you? This is like 90% of the work right here. The rest is just the icing on the cake that completes it, right? I'd like to have a little look at that icing, but first, I guess there's a question here.
Just before we jump into process, how would you address a client who comes in when doing the permanence reframe when they tell you it's a 10? No, it's always been a 10. No, it's never not been a 10 type of thing.
That's fine. Were you born this way?
No.
So clearly there's a time when it wasn't there, right?
Right.
And yet it's been there for quite some time now.
I was thinking more in the lines of, say, someone after an accident, they have that event, which they blame
Sure.
fine before, not fine after.
Okay, well, let's put it this way. There are ways to deal with this, ways to have that conversation, but it goes into way more technical stuff than we need to have right here. It's a tiny, tiny, tiny percentage of anyone who will have pain will say that. And here's the thing. It won't be true, right? Pain is never constant at a level. It always fluctuates, always. So if they're telling you it's always constant, they're once again telling you their mindset. And their mindset is they're looking for it to be like that, and that's part of the reason it is. Does that make sense?
It does. I guess I was wondering how we as therapists would go about letting them into that without diminishing their view.
Sure. And that's part of the conversation you end up having. Here's what I would simply do I'll give it to you in rough terms because I don't want to get into otherwise we'll miss all the other stuff we're doing, right? The rough version of it is very simple. To politely make fun of them, right? Are you sure? It's been exactly the same way, right? You've never even fallen asleep so deeply that you had no idea what was happening, that when you woke, that you forgot about it whilst you were asleep and then woke up? Well, of course I've done that. Oh, so there are times when you don't experience it. That's the crude version of it, and there's much more eloquent. Sometimes you may spend 2-3 sessions only on that conversation. And if you're not ready to have that conversation yet because you don't have enough experience with more regular situations, then don't go there. Those are much more chronic, much more cemented versions of pain. And just like with normal hypnotherapy, why take on Tyson the first time round? Start with his little sister, right? She needs to be knocked around a bit. Metaphor, just in case anyone's wondering, okay? Does that help? So here we are, we've done all this lovely stuff. we're 80% of the way there. How do we get the client over the hump, right? What do we do to get that last 2, on the scale, to either remove it entirely, as we did here and over here, or even if it's an 8, bring it down to a 6, to a 5, to a 4, and give them the hope that at some point it'll either disappear or be down at such a trivial level that they're quite okay to go home and live their life like that. This is really the domain of the techniques themselves, right? I could give you 1,000 techniques. I don't know how many you know, but I have come across hundreds of these things, right? There's a lot out there. You've seen a lot out there, I presume, right? And rather than list all the techniques, what I'd rather do is teach you the principles and then illustrate those principles by showing you how many different techniques are built up. Does that make sense to you guys? Because then you can make up your own techniques on the fly. Was what I did right here with Liz, was that a technique? Maybe, maybe not. It could be turned into a technique, but it's irrelevant. I just work with what I had there, right? So here are the major categories in terms of, there's only 4 categories in terms of the principles that you want to pay attention to when doing pain control. Now, please do not think that I'm giving you a shopping list of techniques to work with pain with just to dump stuff on you. We could practice each and every one of these, but time does not permit for that. What I would encourage you to have is more the experience, understanding that there are only 4 principles that you need to know, and that these are just different ways of activating those principles to get you thinking about it. So when you have a real client in real pain, you can have that conversation, and whatever they bring up will activate the right principle for you, and you'll slip out and go, oh, I just want to say this, and see where it goes. Right?